Today we are doing the Program 4 clay project, which is based on Rodin's The Thinker. It is a sculpture of a person. The kids are going to ask you if they can make a sculpture of an animal, and the answer to that question is no. We're doing a sculpture of a person today. So if you watch the Clay Basics video, you will have learned how to cut your 25-pound bag of clay into 24 chunks. I recommend that because of your class size that you use a bag and a half of clay. Just make sure when you leave that extra half bag of clay that you've already cut into chunks that you label it and say there are 12 chunks of clay in this bag, and just put it back with the rest of the clay so another class can use it. So each kid is going to get a chunk of clay about this size, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit smaller, and that's okay. When you're doing these kinds of building projects, it's really important that you use the proper techniques so as not to trap air inside of your sculpture. If you're trapping little bits of air inside your sculptures, then they have a tendency to blow up in the kiln. So I'm going to show you a couple of things for them not to do. I'm going to put my nice piece of clay aside. If they take their piece of clay and they make it flat like that, and then they scrape it up off of there and they roll it back up into a ball, they have just trapped lots of different air bubbles into here. So even if they take this and roll it and try and make a head and try and make a body, there is air trapped in all of this clay. So what's going to happen in the kiln is steam will build up in those air pockets, and because they have nowhere to escape, it makes the whole thing explode. And the sad part about that is it doesn't just explode the project of the kid who didn't build it right. It usually explodes the projects that are adjacent to it in the kiln. Sometimes the whole clay shelf, depending on how big the project is or how many of them are blowing up at a time. So you really want to make them pay attention when you're demonstrating, or really listen to this video if you're showing this video in class. So they're going to start off with a chunk of clay that has no air bubbles in it. So they want to try and keep as much of this clay intact as possible. So what I like to do is have them cut off a piece of clay, because like this one, I want this guy to sit down. So I needed a little bit of clay for him to sit on. So I'm going to take a little bit of clay just right off the chunk and put it aside. And now I know I have something that I can use for a seat. Okay, and then I'm just going to start pushing this clay and see how I'm just kind of rolling it and slapping it gently into kind of a big round column. And if we can get these into a nice big round column, I'm going to show you really easily how to make them into a figure. Okay, so I have this into a column like that. I can start pinching off a piece like this, and where I'm pinching will become the neck, and then this piece will become the head. And see, I haven't attached any clay at all, so I don't need to worry about air bubbles. So here already it's starting to look like a figure, a head and some shoulders. So here's a really good way to cut your arms and legs. So you could just cut down there and make two legs, and then cut here and here to make two arms. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I can use any one of the clay tools for this. The clay is really soft at this point, so I can just get in here and cut. And I'm not worried about their shape really right now, because I can still push and pull the clay. So all of a sudden now, from my chunk of clay, I have what really looks like a person. So this could be it. You could be done. If you want it to stand, you could tamp it down so it actually stands. If you want it to sit, however, you might want to make these legs a little bit longer. So I'm just gently going in there, and I'm kind of pulling and pinching the clay together and pulling. I'm going to do that. You want to make sure your legs are pretty much the same length. And you want to make sure that they stay pretty sturdy. You want to make sure your legs don't get too thin. Otherwise it won't hold the weight of the clay. And go a little bit longer, because if I want him to sit, so I'm going to bend him at the hips, I'm going to bend him at the knee. Look at that. I have my little bench here, which maybe isn't exactly the right height, so I'm just going to, by using gravity, just kind of tamp it down until it gets to sort of the right height that I want. And now I have a guy sitting, so that's pretty cool. So I want to keep working on his head. It's got a weird shape, so I'm going to just keep working on the head a little bit. I'm supporting the neck because it's a skinnier part of the clay, and this ball of clay that I'm using for the head is heavier than that. So I'm supporting the neck so it doesn't get really thin and wobbly, because I don't want his head to fall off. So I'm just kind of pushing that into a nicer head shape. And then I want his arms to not look like these weird pieces. So maybe I'm gonna make his arms a little bit rounder, a little bit longer. I could even flatten off a piece at the end to look like hands. So do that on both sides. Remember, you want your arms and legs to both be about the same size, same length as each other. You know, maybe turn it so he has his hand down on in his lap, like that. Or maybe I decide, you know what, I really want him to be waving, so I can give him an elbow. There, not bad, or he's raising his hand in class. Okay, so that's pretty good. What I want to do now is make sure that this figure is attached to the seat. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to score where he's attached to the seat, and I'm going to score the seat right there. I'm going to take some of the slip and I'm going to attach it on. Just like that. And that way he's forever attached onto that block of clay. Now, if you get parts where when you're bending, if they start looking like they're going to crack, you can stick your finger into the slip and get it a little bit wet, and then just roll your finger on the part of the clay that's getting dry and cracked looking. So there you have a seated figure. You can also add more details like this one. He's got some hair on there, and I think I probably used a fork for that, just to rough that up. But you can do a lot of the detail in the glazing portion when you come back to it. So here we got some hair. You could also, you know, use any of your tools and start creating a face on there if you want to. Some of these tools have really good shapes for that. I'm just pushing in where the eyes might go, and that creates a nose and kind of eyebrows at the same time. Well, now at least he has a nose and hair. And I'm going to do the rest with glaze. So that's one way to do this project. So I'm going to show you another way, and that is if you wanted to attach a piece. So for these purposes, I'm going to cut his head off. Okay, so now I have a nice body, and I have a nice head, and I want to attach the two. I can't just push them down like this, because they might stick like right now, but as it dries, there's nothing holding them together, so they'll just pop off. So the way I would do that is the same way I attached his body to his seat, and that is to score it on both sides of the pieces that I'm attaching. Take a little bit of slip, put it there, then I'm going to squeeze it down on there. I want to make sure that I kind of push and turn it. I want to get that slip down into all the nooks and crannies. And then I can just come with my fingers, take off the rest of the slip. I could use a tool to get rid of that line, that cut line, so you don't even see it and it'll look like one piece. So anything that you're attaching to this, you need to slip it, or score it and slip it, and really push it down and attach it. If you want your figure to be standing or walking like this, whoop, it has to be able to stand. See, this one doesn't stand very well. It has to be able to stand on its own. If it has to lie down in the kiln because it won't stand, then that's how you have to glaze it. So if you want it to be a standing figure, you have to make sure it stands. And the way you can do that, see if I can get this guy to stand now. So I've decided he doesn't want to be a sitting figure. He wants to be a standing figure. And now his head is kind of heavy for his legs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make him a walking figure. And I'm going to make sure that I make his feet kind of big. And I try and just sort of balance him out so that he's standing on his own. And when he's on the drying shelf, he's got to be able to stand on his own like that. So it's worth taking the time to go over to the drying shelf and put your figure there the way you want him to pose. If he falls over on the drying shelf, then when you get the figure back, it'll be like this, and he'll have to lie down. He won't be able to stand on his own. So I like having him sit. That way, at least you have a nice solid base where the stool is for them to sit on. When you're done, you would write your name or initials. You can write them on the bottom or on the back of the stool. I'm going to go on the back of my stool. I'm going to write my initials and the room number really clearly. And I want the parent volunteers to check that they can read the initials and the room number. Parent volunteers need to know the initials to know which kid did which project. And I need the room number so that I can make sure that the projects get to the correct classroom. Once you're done, you put them on the clay drying shelf like this to dry. When they are dry, I will put them in the kiln and fire them, and then I will put them into your class cabinet. So when you get them back in your class cabinet, they will be bisque fired and they'll look like this, nice and hard and white, and they'll be ready for glaze. If you do not finish them in one class period and you wish to continue working on them, even next week or the week after, you would just simply put each project into one of the food and bread bags that are in the orange cabinet. They're in the drawer of the orange cabinet. Write the student's name on the bag. Gently place the project in the bag with all of their clay pieces that they're still using. And then you need to press the air out and tie up the bag. If you get a nice seal on this bag, just tie a knot. It will stay wet forever until you're ready to come back and work with the clay. You can put the projects in the bags on the clay drying shelf and I'll know that they're not done and I shouldn't put them in the kiln. So then when you come back, you would just take them out of the bags. You'll probably need to do a little reshaping because sometimes they get banged around a little bit. So have the kids take them out of the bag, look at their posture and pose, make sure they are the way they want them to be, and then you'd put them on the clay drying shelf to dry. The kids can then take any extra clay in their plastic bag, tie it in a knot, they can take it home. And that's that. So make sure to watch the next video, which goes over the glazing process.